Good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me. I came to New Zealand once before, 12 years ago, to give evidence to your commission on genetic engineering, because I was trying to persuade the commission to speak out against genetic engineering of animals, and did some other things while I was here to do with animal welfare, and kind of fell in love with New Zealand, really. What a lovely country. And I'm just looking at this and thinking, how does this work? Excuse me, let me put my glasses on. Back and next. Good, that sounds good. So I'm very glad to be here, and I hope my presentation is of interest to you, and I'm particularly delighted that so many people are here from the ministry. I'm going down there on Wednesday to meet some more of you, and look forward to that immensely. Now, next, no, right, okay. Yes, well, the philosopher Descartes is not much loved by animal welfarists, because he was the one who really started the very negative view of animals as purely machines. So if you kind of tortured an animal and it squealed or yelped, it was simply a mechanical reaction. And actually he had a huge influence on thinking for, I'd say, for nearly 300 years. So there are various terms that have been used to describe the kind of ways that we can mentally distance ourselves from animals. And speciesism was a term coined by Richard Ryder, who is still going strong and has been very involved with the RSPCA in the UK. So the belief in the inherent superiority of humans over other species because of our clever brains. And this, I think, is still actually the basic way that most people view themselves in relation to animals. But if you look up speciesism in that good old Oxford Dictionary, this is what it says: by analogy with racism and sexism, the improper stance of refusing respect to the lives, dignity, or needs of animals of other than the human species, which does recognize, of course, that we are animals too. But there's, the other term that one could use would be anthropocentrism, putting man at the center of everything. So human interests come first. Oh, I've turned it off, how wonderful. Oh no, good, it's on again. And we have greater intrinsic value than any other species, and probably most people in the world do believe that, and that all our judgments should be assessed by how they affect human interests. So I believe that actually anthropocentrism, putting people in the center of everything, is similar to regarding people as inferior because of their status, because of their gender, because of their color, or because of their ability. So what is animal sentience? And there are actually quite a few definitions around. Mark Beckhoff, who's spent a lot of his life promoting animal sentience, says it's the ability to feel, perceive, or be conscious, or to experience subjectivity, to know that this is something you want, or something you don't want, or something you're frightened of. Professor John Webster, who's probably one of the world's leading experts on farm animal welfare, and cattle welfare in particular, and former head of the vet school at Bristol University, he's put it very simply: a sentient animal is one for whom feelings matter. But there is, quite a lot of scientific work still going on to say, if you look at different species and go down as we put it, down the scale of animals and get to very, insect level and lower, where does sentience begin? And, probably the jury's out exactly where it begins. But I think all the animals that we're concerned with here today are definitely in. Now, I said that Descartes did a lot of harm, Now, good old Charles Darwin, who was such a great biologist, actually, I think he said it all. And I'll just leave you a minute to read that for yourselves rather than reading it out. Perhaps I should read it out because the camera's on. We have seen that the senses and intuitions, the various emotions and faculties, such as love, memory, attention and curiosity, imitation, reason, etc., of which man boasts, may be found in an incipient or even sometimes a well-developed condition in the lower animals. And Darwin distinguished kind of higher animals, the ones more like us, and lower animals. And he's saying that these abilities are actually in lower animals, not just in the higher animals, more like us. And then he went on to say the difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great as it is, certainly is one of degree and not of kind. So if Darwin had been listened to on this aspect of his work and taken really seriously, we might not be in the position we're in today with so many animal welfare problems. And good old Jeremy Bentham, we always use him, and Bob has already given you this great quote, you know, question is not can they reason nor can they talk, but can they suffer? Now, one of the things which animal welfarists often get criticised for is that we're too anthropomorphic. We presume that animals have these feelings like we do. So is there good science to support anthropomorphism? And I have to admit that I'm totally an anthropomorphist, and I think it's good science. But actually, it's not just me saying that. One of the world's best primatologists, Frans de Waal, says to endow animals with human emotions has long been a scientific taboo. But if we do not, we risk missing something fundamental about both animals and us. And if you haven't read any of his books, I recommend them. And he's absolutely, you know, an establishment figure in a way. He's not regarded as, you know, outside the inner circle of good science. He's well respected. So some of the things which are obviously really important to animals are things like maternal bonding. And you can see that when you take the cow away from the calf, they are obviously deeply distressed. But also there are things like playing. Animals like to have fun. If we look at these old prejudices about animals, sometimes they're also extended to some of those other beings who at the time, other human beings, were regarded as inferior. In the 19th century in the United States, no anesthetics were given to those seen as pain insensitive. Recent immigrants, black or poor people. That's how we used to treat each other. And the new view is that humans and animals are on a spectrum of capabilities. And so we should respect animals' potential and their emotional capacity for pleasure and pain. So if we say that it's not like a rigid division between human and animal, but it's on a spectrum, then I think we'll probably end up in a better place. So what do scientists say now? And actually Professor Marion Dawkins from Oxford University has said that the study of animal sentience is the most exciting area of research at the moment. So if there are any potential PhDs here, you know where to go. So I'm just going to give a few references here, and I wouldn't bother writing anything down because hopefully this presentation can be made available afterwards here. So the central nervous system and even the recently evolved neocortex exist in all vertebrates. Large cetaceans and elephants have almost as many neurons as humans in their brains. And humpback whales have cortical spindle cells, which are apparently used for processing emotions. So they have, you know, the same ones that we have. And macaque monkeys, dolphins, elephants, and magpies have mirror neurons, which are involved in empathic behavior. And I suspect a lot more species will be added to that list. And fish have pain receptor systems similar to those of complex vertebrates. they produce natural pain-killing opioids, and they respond to morphine. So if you hurt fish, and they're obviously reacting, squirming around, and then you put morphine or something in the water, they will get, relaxed, the pain will go away. So that's a kind of proof, if you like, that they have pain. But they do have the same nociceptors that we have, which convey pain to the brain. And obviously, if we recognize that fish have the ability to feel pain, it raises an awful lot of questions. So empathy is being displayed by primates and companion animals, and that's Frans de Waal again, that guy I quoted earlier. But this one is quite interesting, that mice exhibit increased pain response when seeing a cage mate's been given a noxious substance. They took mice who knew each other. They'd lived in the same cage, and not that I like mice being kept in cages, but still. Sometimes this kind of research, if it's not hugely invasive, can provide useful answers and help us in making the case for sentience. So half the mice were given a noxious substance, and the brain waves were being measured, and they reacted, with obvious pain and aversion to this substance. And then they gave them time to recover, and they were able to watch the other half of the cage mates being given the same substance, but they were still being wired up, and they reacted almost exactly the same as when they were given it. So it would seem that the mice were aware that the others were being given the same substance, and they knew that their cage mates were in pain. And I think that's fantastic evidence showing what must be something, the beginnings of empathy, if not quite strong empathy, in animals, that we regard as, not too much like us, being just mice. But lots of research. Christine Nicol, who's now head of the vet school at Bristol University, chickens learn by watching each other to avoid bad things and go for good things. Then very interesting with the research that was done at Bristol University. As you know, broiler chickens are reared for fast growth, increasingly fast growth, and the bodies can't support the rate of growth. And they go lame. Many of them go lame. So they put out some similar looking food for the chickens, and one half of the food was laced with a painkiller, carprofen, and the rest of the food was just normal food. Well, very quickly, the chickens that were obviously lame learned to choose the food that had the painkiller because it eased their pain. They were then able to walk more normally. And again, that shows their ability to feel pain. And also, it's a kind of condemnation of the broiler industry, which has bred these chickens to grow so fast that they do go lame. So another paper showing that goat kids can understand and perform advanced cognitive tasks. You could look at that paper. And even fish, some fish, like groupers, do actually use tools or cooperate with other species. Groupers cooperate with a kind of eel, so that the eel can get into the crevices of the rock where the little fish that groupers want to eat are hiding. So the groupers kind of alert the eels that there are fish in this crevice, and the eels come along and go in and get some fish for themselves, but some of the little fish are washed out for the groupers to eat. So how do they work that one out? It's quite clever. Just want to show you this short piece of film from Marion Dawkins at Oxford University. And it's just to show how hard a battery hen who's been taken away from the battery, how hard she'll work to get to a nest in which to lay her eggs. And this hen has had to work out that she has to peck so often at something to open a door, pull a string to open a door, to get through. She has to jump over things. But she knows that if she can do all these things, she will eventually get to a nest. And by measuring how hard an animal will work for something that it wants, you can assess how important that thing is to the animal. And I think this shows that having a proper nest is very, very important to a laying hen. Now she can make her nest. So just very briefly, several species do make and use tools, and they can show mirror recognition, and monkeys can apparently count up to a certain level. And then, of course, sheep can also perform cognitive tasks as well as monkeys, which is quite interesting because we usually think of sheep as being slightly inferior beings. So I've stuck a bit of modern art in here. And you know, you could walk into a gallery, I think, and see these on the wall. And in fact, they were sold for several $1,000s. But actually, they were painted by Congo, the chimpanzee. I think they're quite nice. I wouldn't mind having one, but I haven't got several $1,000s to buy one. So that's interesting. I mean, can chimpanzees have a concept of painting? It looks as though they can. And octopi, which are, you know, obviously quite bright creatures themselves. Well, this octopus was given a screw-cap jar and was obviously really intrigued to see, you know, what's inside there. I can see something, and managed to open it successfully. Mind you, they've got a lot of sort of tentacles with which to open a jar instead of just a hand. I just want to tell you about an experiment which Professor Donald Broom did at Cambridge University. And he got these young cattle and trained them to go down a kind of corridor, a race as you call it. And each time they went down, at the end, there would be a food reward. So obviously they loved going down because they get the food reward. And then the researchers put a gate across the corridor. So the cows now had to learn how to open the gate. And, you know, it wasn't that easy and took each one a little while. And again, they had things to measure their brain reaction. And when each one managed to open that gate for the very first time, their brains went zzz, just perhaps as ours would when we solve a problem. And so he actually called it the eureka moment. And, you know, he's a very establishment scientist and a very respected scientist. But he was happy to call it the eureka moment. So that again shows a huge capacity among animals that we might never think of having that kind of capacity. And then other work done at the Babraham Institute in Cambridge by Keith Kendrick showed that sheep can remember 50 other sheep faces and 10 human faces for 2 years. Now, I have trouble remembering 10 human faces, people I don't see for 2 years sometimes. I think, oh, I know her. And they also prefer smiling human faces to sort of grim, cross-looking faces. And this is all, again, measured by electrodes on the brain. But they actually could remember the 50 other sheep, not just by pictures of the front face of the sheep, but even in profile, which I think is quite extraordinary. So Nietzsche, the philosopher, made an interesting comment I thought I'd just pop in here. He said, we do not regard the animals as moral beings, and by and large we don't. But do you suppose the animals regard us as moral beings? I think that's a really good question. And I just want to talk a little bit about the area that I've specialized in, if you like, which is farming and farm animals. So I would say anthropocentric, human-centered farming is actually factory farming. They use highly productive but vulnerable breeds like those chickens. They keep a lot of animals in a space. They confine individuals, mutilate others, give unnatural diets to animals, and often excessive transport. So, for example, the highly productive chicken I've referred to, there are now 58 billion chickens reared for slaughter in the world every year, which is a huge number. 98% of these chickens come from 3 multinational breeding companies. So there's no point somebody saying, oh, well, it's different in our country, because actually virtually the same chickens are used all over the world, be it New Zealand, China, the USA, UK, whatever. And the companies compete with each other to reduce the number of days you have to take the chickens to reach slaughter weight so that you can get more chickens through your chicken shed per year and increase your profits. And so they are nearly all these fast-growing breeds with resulting leg problems. And just to show you that if you take an egg-laying chick and a meat chick, this is the difference in size. If you think they were originally the same, how they've been, selectively bred for this amazing fast growth. It's not surprising they go lame. We also know that high-yielding cows are more vulnerable to mastitis and lameness. And the cows, again, have been the victims of selective breeding, which has bred them to produce more and more milk. So the average high-yielding cow is now giving 10 times as much milk as her calf would have drunk from her, which is obviously why she produced milk in the first place. And of course, the calf is taken away. But these cows are more vulnerable, both to lameness, which is very chronic in the dairy herd generally, and mastitis, which is extremely painful. Pigs often kept in these appalling conditions. This is a photo taken from an investigation we did recently in Europe. I think this particular farm was in Ireland, and as I'm Irish myself, I feel really, so appalled by this. Then, of course, you get the mutilations, little piglets having their tails cut off without any anaesthetic or follow-up pain relief. And it's so unnecessary because piglets' tails are cut off because if you keep pigs in the barren condition of the factory farm on slatted floors, etc., without any enrichment, they will bite each other's tails. Infection can set in. You then have to pay for a vet or an antibiotic. But there's a very simple answer. If we look at this, when you put environmental enrichment into where the pigs are living, tail biting goes right down. So you can see when there's straw on the floor, there are a few mild lesions and very few serious lesions. If you give the pigs just a chain, which some farmers do sadly and think that that's enrichment, the pigs will muck about with it a bit, but they will still bite each other's tails. And the same for rubber toys. Some farmers throw in an old football. Well, it's interesting for 20 minutes and then it goes flat and it's not interesting anymore. But even having straw in a hopper will help a tiny bit, but not much. So you do have to have something on the floor. And that's because pigs have this really sensitive snout. I think 90% of the nervous system is linked to the snout. And they like to get their snouts down into the soil or into the straw or whatever it may be. So you've got to recognize that and provide the correct environmental enrichment. Of course, long-distance transport is a huge problem for animals. I mean, just basically the physiological level. They get stressed, it's a strange place to be. It's probably scary. They're often mixed with animals they don't know. And often they're dehydrated, like these poor sheep that had travelled all over Europe and had got down to southern Italy. One load from France, one from Scotland. And they were panting. And you don't normally see sheep pant. Sadly, they were left on the quayside over the weekend. And by Monday morning, I think 125, especially on the top layer, were dead. But that's a kind of thing that seems to happen. It does seem that the long-distance animal transport trade, live export trade, whatever you want to call it, is inherently subject to things going wrong. Ventilation systems, whatever, human error. So sadly, industrial farming, and this was just a dead pig in a lagoon beside a factory farm in Poland, does regard animals as disposable objects. And you build into the system and your profit margins, you know that so many animals will die, be they pigs or chickens or whatever. So I thought we'd just be a little anthropomorphic for a minute. And I would ask you, would you rather be kept like these broiler chickens, which is how most broiler chickens are kept, or like these ones? And the chickens on the left are in China, and they're a slow-growing breed living in totally natural conditions. The chickens on the right, these are both meat chickens, are in Portugal. And as you can see, many of them have done their natural behavior of flying up to perch in the branches of that tree. Now those broilers you saw, the white ones in the crowded shed, they can't fly up to trees anymore because they've got so heavy they couldn't do it even if you allowed them, put them out with the tree, they couldn't get up there. And that seems to me fundamentally wrong. And so here we have the hens in the battery cage, and as you can see, she's been well de-beaked as well. Oh, sorry, I meant to call it beak trimming, apparently. But as you can imagine, standing on a sloping wire mesh floor day after day after day, that is not what chickens like to be doing. If you put them out in the soil, they'd be scratching away. So would you be like to be in a cage, or would you like to be like this, where you can carry out your natural behaviours? And would you like to be bred for double muscling, like this Belgian blue beef animal, which will produce lots more beef for you and increase your profits, but it could mean that all the offspring have to be born by caesarean section because the calves are too big? Or would you rather be a sort of hardy native breed out on the grass? And would you rather be kept in a crowded pig shed, or like these, who also are a more hardy breed? And I believe these pigs were in Brazil, actually, though sadly a lot of pigs in Brazil are factory farmed. And would you like to be in a sow in a sow stall? No, you wouldn't. So please, Ministry for Primary Industries, notice. I mean, how could anyone say that that's a good way to keep any animal? Stand up, lie down, and nothing more for 16 and a half weeks of your pregnancy? I don't think so. Would you rather be like these sows? They are indoors, but at least they've got a deep straw bed, and they do seem to have enough room to lie down at the same time and move around. And if you were a sow, would you like to give birth in a farrowing crate and suckle your piglets, you know, able to stand up and lie down, but again, you can't turn around. You can't even really kind of see or nuzzle your own offspring. But this is how most pigs, the vast majority of pigs in industrial farms, give birth and suckle for 3 or 4 weeks. Or would you rather be in a nice straw-lined shed where you can actually see your piglets and you all have comfort? So Albert Einstein, who's known for many good things, said our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. So he was kind of talking really in, you know, in 1921, factory farming hadn't got off the ground. We didn't have antibiotics, which makes it possible to keep thousands of animals in a shed. But he felt that it wasn't the animals in the prison, it was us, that we kind of made a prison around our own perception of animals, and that we have to get out of our prison to acknowledge other creatures as they really are. Then Sir Alistair Hardy, who sadly died since he wrote this, and he was quite a radical, I think. He said, I heretically think that love, joy and beauty are not only generated but felt, who knows, far down in the animal world, and that man alone has come to discuss and express them in words. And then James Serpell, who is still going strong, said, people who display emotional concern for animal suffering are often treated as misguided idealists. We may have a room full of them today. Truth is that it is normal and natural for people to empathize and identify with other life forms. It is the essence of our humanity. And I think, you know, he's quite right. And I do love this quote, and sorry for sticking to him, but Voltaire, famous French philosopher, I think this kind of sums it up. And it was a kind of reaction to Descartes and that animals are machines nonsense. How pitiful and what poverty of mind to have said that the animals are machines, deprived of understanding and feeling. Poverty of mind, I think that's just about it, and good for him. So what's happening kind of in the world of animal sentience? Well, the Great Ape Project was started in 1994, and I believe New Zealand kind of supports it. I'm sure you can put me right on that if it doesn't. And it's seeking a UN declaration which would extend to non-human great apes the protection of 3 basic interests: the right to life, the protection of individual liberty, and the prohibition of torture. In other words, these ghastly experiments that are done on primates. So that was founded, gosh, it's nearly 20 years ago, and it hasn't got the declaration yet, obviously, but is still working to get it. Then last year, a lot of scientists and philosophers got together at Cambridge and made the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, saying the weight of evidence indicates that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, and many other creatures, including octopuses, also possess these neurological substrates. And this wasn't just a meeting of animal welfare people, this was a wide group. So this was their compromise statement, if you like, but I think it's quite helpful. So this is just a photo from Compassionable Farming's campaign to get animals recognised as sentient beings in the European Treaty. And the lady with the blonde hair is Joanna Lumley, who some of you may know, but she's Britain's best-loved celebrity. And on the left is Philip Limbury, who's now our chief executive, and on the right, Peter Stevenson, who's our wonderful chief lobbyist. So we were outside number 10 then, handing in a petition to ask the UK government to support the changing of the European Treaty. And what had happened, the European Treaty did start out simply by putting animals in the category of goods or products. So they were in the same categories: cabbages, potatoes, sacks of wheat, whatever. And our founder, Peter Roberts, who'd been a farmer himself, said, we've got to change the treaty. I remember standing in his office in 1988 when he said it, and we thought, yeah, we'll just change the European Treaty. So we started a petition, and we wrote to all the other animal welfare groups in the European Union, 15 countries at the time, it's now 28. And the groups were great. They translated the petition. And in those days, it wasn't go on your computer and on the internet and sign a petition. It was on paper. You had to go out in the streets and get your signatures. But within 3 years, we got 1 million signatures. And at the time, that was the largest petition ever handed to the European Parliament. And you always wonder what happens to petitions when you hand them in. At the European Parliament, they actually have a petitions committee who look at all the petitions. And it took 3 years to get to the top of the list, but they did actually support it. So the whole of the European Parliament did vote in favour, asking for a change in the law. And we then had some really good fortune well, actually, if I say this, in 1997, Tony Blair's Labour government took over in the UK. Now, I'm not a Blairite, don't get me wrong, but it was good for us because the person who became the agriculture minister was someone we had lobbied for about 6 years on this issue. So always lobby the opposition because they might get in next time. He was an animal welfarist. He totally accepted that, it would be great to get the treaty changed. 6 weeks after Tony Blair's government got in, there was a meeting of the prime ministers of the European Union in Amsterdam. And this minister managed to sort of bypass all the civil servants. Sorry, I'm not being rude about civil servants in general, but there were 1 or 2 individuals who were really trying to stop him, and bypassed them and got it on the agenda, and the prime ministers voted for it. So there was Joanna Lumley again. We always use our best celebrity to try and get publicity for our cause. And we demonstrated outside a meeting of ministers. This is before Tony Blair got in. This one was in Dublin Castle. And then when the prime ministers met in Amsterdam, we had a sort of international march and ended up outside the huge sort of palace place where they were meeting. And there were people from all the 15 member states of the European Union at that time. And they all saw us because they drove in their big buses. So all the prime ministers saw us, and perhaps, that helped too. So a good march you know, not an illegal or violent march, but a good march is a good thing. And so it became accepted into the Treaty of Amsterdam. It became a protocol. And then when a new treaty was, another new treaty was developed, a sort of development of the same treaty called the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, it was upgraded to an article within the treaty. And this is what it now says. In formulating and implementing the Union, that's the European Union's agriculture, fisheries, transport, internal market, research and technological development and space policies, the Union and the member states shall, since animals are sentient beings, pay full regard to the welfare requirements of animals. And I think that's really important. Now, it does go on, sadly to say, something like, except where this conflicts with the cultural tradition. And I think they put that in because otherwise Spain would not have voted for it because of bullfighting. So at the end of the day, sometimes you have to compromise. But the fact is, this is what it says. And it does mean that each of the now 28 member states of the European Union actually are obliged to pay full regard to the welfare requirements of animals. They don't always do that, but at least you can hold them to account if they don't. Then another thing which happened recently, which some of you may know about, but there was a big campaign by many of the animal welfare groups in India to stop the development of a dolphinarium. And it ended up with the government actually recognizing cetaceans as non-human persons, which I think is a very interesting development. Because the Indian government, although it's in the Indian constitution from 1947, to place a duty on all citizens to care for animals, when it comes to the negotiating table, the Indian government is often absolutely useless on this issue, sadly. But amazingly, they came out with this. And then, of course, the World Society for the Protection of Animals is leading this campaign with other NGOs like Compassion and the Humane Society in the US to get a United Nations Universal Declaration on Animal Welfare, which would recognize that animals are sentient, can suffer and feel pain, that their needs must be respected, and that cruelty must end. And that campaign is going ahead. It's in progress at the moment. Let's hope we're successful, because it would be great to get recognition at UN level. And I'm not really having a dig, but I couldn't resist putting this in. WSJ is Wall Street Journal. And to my amazement, a few weeks ago, a colleague drew my attention to a piece of film, and I'm not showing you the whole film because I'm so worried about it going wrong, but if you get the whole PowerPoint, you will see the reference where you can see the film yourself. Well, this huge complex is a dairy farm in China. And the film is a kind of glorification of this enterprising Chinese businessman who has set up this massive dairy factory farm in China. In the course of the film, he says, and of course I import these free-range animals from Australia and New Zealand, and I adapt them to my factory farm. Now, I just felt kind of a bit, well, amazed, first of all, that this was said like, this is a good thing. And it was all about glorifying this wonderful enterprising businessman who had set up this factory farm. You know, you can't see any cows because they never go out. But, you know, he was happy to say that, yes, of course, they came from pastures green in Australia and New Zealand, but that he would then adapt them. Well, you know, I bet if you took any of those poor cows out of there and put them in a field, they'd be jumping for joy. So I do think, although New Zealand hasn't been exporting animals for slaughter and does just export for breeding purposes, you really have a responsibility to see where you're sending them and where they're going to end up. Or, you know, I mean, this is something for a legal mind, perhaps, Ian. You know, where does responsibility end? When they leave your shores? I don't know. I do think it's worth thinking about. So I think with the reform and updating of the Animal Welfare Act, it's a fantastic opportunity for New Zealand to recognise animals as sentient beings and create really strong laws, not just codes, laws to protect their well-being. And I hope you do. Thank you.
Thank
Do you want me to take questions?
Would you like to take some
Yeah, sure.
questions, all right? So
Yeah.
the floor is open. Everyone will dart around with the machine, and please feel free to ask any questions.
Oh, come on, challenge me.
Just raise your hand if you want to ask a question or say anything. No? I think it was all very self-explanatory. They're all happy with it. Yeah?
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
let's get a really great Animal Welfare Act then. Go for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.